My name is Savannah Osman. I'm with USA Wrestling. We're working in communications, and I have Amy Zirneklis here with me today. She's the COO and co-founder of Wrestle Like a Girl. And we'll start. Amy, do you just want to give a little bit of a background on, how you got connected with Wrestle Like a Girl, what started that, how you got connected with Sally, and your kind of background in the sport of wrestling?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you to USA Wrestling and to you, Savannah, for having me on. It's an honor to be with you and everybody today and to share a little bit about myself and Wrestle Like a Girl. So, um, how I got connected to Sally, that's kind of a funny story. Um, I used to work in uh, professional bicycle racing, and so I had a bit of time with USA Cycling. Um, and I was also racing bikes at the same time. So Sally was at the training center, living at the training center and training. And I think she would get a little bit bored. So she would wander over to the velodrome, which is something that I like to race on. Um, I think back then they had a Tuesday and a Thursday night series. And she's the consummate just cheerleader for girls and women. So she would always be cheering for us. I'm like, who's this person that's cheering for us all the time? So we became friends at the velodrome. And then as she progressed in her journey uh, through the national team and then deciding to join the army, we would have those kind of life conversations. And then while she was deployed, she called me several times and was really moved by what she was experiencing while she was deployed. And some folks may have heard this story already, but part of her responsibility in the military was to go out into the villages and try and establish a rapport with the women so they could maybe learn some things from the women that were going on in the village. And as she was doing this, little girls started noticing her and started following them. And the unit that she was attached with was really shocked because they had never had little girls following them. Um, and they would want to give Sally the Afghan version of a high five, which is you put your thumbs together. So, sorry, I don't know if my camera's placed accurately. So, so this really moved her, and she ended up reflecting a lot um, about her journey through the sport, and she had a very big disappointment. She didn't make the Olympic team, and that took quite a while to process through. And she thought, well, I want to give back to girls, and I was planted in the sport of wrestling. So I think I want to do something. And that's kind of how the conversation started, of just having this kind of heartfelt sense from what these little girls in the Middle East were. And they were running after her because they hadn't seen a female soldier. So they hadn't really um, been exposed to a female that was in a position of power within that environment. And so I just had those conversations and said, I think I want to start a nonprofit and um, just introduce the sport. And I said, okay, uh, I'll help you. So started off as a sounding board. My professional experience and background is in business management and particularly sport business management. Um, so then we just started.
Yeah, that's a very cool story. Yeah, it's really interesting because, well, you obviously you have a background in sports management, and we'll talk. I'll probably ask you a little bit more about that because kind of curious about that journey that you've had, as a woman working in sports, pretty inspirational to see women working in sports at like higher levels and stuff. Just kind of like shows like, like there's possibilities to get there and everything. So, yeah, can you talk a little bit about your journey in sports management? I know you've been a little bit kind of, you started at, I believe, UCCS, and then it kind of moved around from there. But what was that journey like?
Yeah. So maybe I'll go a little bit further back and kind of set the stage for just um, my life as an athlete. So um, I started playing soccer when I was 5, and in high school I was an all-around athlete. I was soccer, I was volleyball, I was track and field. I was fortunate enough to have the choice of whether to go to college for soccer scholarship or volleyball scholarship. And at the time, volleyball was newer to me, so and it was more exciting. So I took the path of becoming a Division I volleyball player at Rider University, um, which was kind of my first exposure to the wrestling community. So Rider is a smaller Division I institution, so it doesn't have football and that kind of culture around uh, everybody going to the football game on Friday or Saturday nights. And the athlete across all the sports that Rider offers, the athlete community was very close, and particularly the volleyball team and the wrestling team. So the wrestling team would come to our matches, we would go to their matches. There might have been some off-season, fun going on together. So it exposed me to kind of the character or archetype of a wrestler, and we just had a lot of fun together and we're great friends. So I stayed at Rider after I graduated for a couple of years, and I was the assistant volleyball coach. I then, uh, during that time, or my last year at university, my mother had passed away. So she was from the Palau Islands in Micronesia, which is close to Guam, for those that aren't super familiar with the Western Pacific. And so I decided to go to Palau and spend time there, where I then was a teacher, an English teacher at the high school, and I was able to represent Palau in the Micronesian Games, playing volleyball in the South Pacific Games with cycling. So I had enjoyed racing and riding bikes after college. And that kind of kicked me off to the diplomatic side. From there, I came back to the States. I took a role at Palau's embassy in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years and got that exposure with international diplomacy. I was still racing my bike, so that fire and excitement was there. And I was working in international diplomacy and kind of seeing firsthand how much impact I would have at a personal level within that space, and came to the conclusion that it wasn't enough of an impact to satisfy me personally. So I then packed up everything in the car, drove out to Colorado Springs, and started working for Carmichael Training Systems, which is an endurance sport coaching company based around running and cycling and triathlon. And then from there, I went to USA Cycling and then got involved into the Olympic space and Olympic family, which is the time period where I became friends with Sally. And then we go from there in terms of the genesis of Wrestle Like a Girl. Um, so it's going to be a little bit of a long-winded answer, but I at that time as well started the graduate program at University of Colorado Springs in their MBA program. I took a dual track in international business and finance, and as at that time as well, still working within professional cycling and helping to um, uh, expand a power meter company. It was a German power meter company. The owner wanted a subsidiary in the United States, so I helped him to build that kind of from the ground up, and then I was with that organization for about 10 years, and MBA, while I was going through the MBA program, I was building a skill set that was then transferable across 3 of the locations that he had. So then I got to practice real time the skill sets that I was building through the MBA program at that company. So that that gave me a lot of experience around marketing, sponsorships. The sponsorship space there was heavily in the European cycling peloton, so I came to know that peloton really well. Uh, Finance, kind of current impact of currency exchanges and so forth. So a lot of it was a smaller company, so I got to have exposure to a lot of different functions of an organization.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you think that your kind of background in international diplomacy because kind of really helped you with, you know, your experience with Wrestle Like a Girl and your experience in, cycling and everything like that? Do you think like that background kind of provided like a really kind of set you up for a better experience or future with that? Because I know that we'll talk about it in a little bit, but you're connected to the Jordanian Wrestling Foundation, which is really interesting. Um,
Yeah, so it's interesting that you gave me this question because I hadn't really reflected uh, much about connecting the dots between it all. So I appreciate the question because it gave me pause to think about my life and kind of put it into a little bit more of a integrated story. So I think the how diplomacy has benefited my work and living within other cultures. So um, part of the time period when I was working for the power meter company, I was living in I was rotating between Germany, Italy, the United States. So I'd had this period in my time where I lived and worked in Palau, which is a completely different culture than the West. It's consensus based, it's matrilineal, it's a split between traditional and democratic um, activities. The society is organized by clan, then shifting to Western Europe and then learning the intricacies of um, German culture versus Italian culture. Uh, I spent some time in Spain as well. So, Spanish culture, learning how each individual group kind of identifies, and also not speaking any of those languages. uh, and having to learn a little, enough of the language to survive, which what that does, it gave me a very practiced skill of listening and speaking because I had to ensure of the little language that I knew, I was I was consistently looking for the words that I understood and then trying to weave that with the context and then understand what the scenario was that I was in front of me. And then at the same time, using the little language that I knew, being able to communicate something that either I needed or I wanted. And that skill set of just um, listening, really listening deeply and searching for the words when I'm communicating that convey the message that I want to say. And hopefully that the other side is receiving that message that I'm intending.
mhm.
Um, that part of uh, living across culture or diplomacy when you're interacting with another group that um, isn't your isn't your primary group, I feel has been a really, really helpful skill to have. whether it's in sport or in business or in just family relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you share a little bit more about Palau and your experience, in that community? Because that's really interesting. I think it's
Yeah.
one of those that not a lot of people get to experience or get to like hear from. So, yeah.
Yeah, so Palau's situated in Western Micronesia. It's an archipelago. It's got about 200 islands. Only about 9 of them are inhabited. Um, the the language is indigenous. Um, it's kind of related to other languages within Micronesia, but it's not spoken anywhere else in the world. Um, it's a matrilineal society, so you follow your mother's blood. Your mother's bloodline is stronger than your father's bloodline, um, and how that translates into how society operates. It's organized by clan, and it's the elder women of the clan who come together to make major decisions around the passing of the title of a chief. So society also still has chiefs in place, and so the elder women come together and decide who will be chief. It's a man. It's a male that occupies the seat, but it is the group of women who decide who will be in that seat. um, so it's consensus based versus Western culture and particularly American culture, which is very individualistic and
Mhm.
um, independent in that sense. So you're always kind of considering what's best for the whole group there, as opposed to um, Western society, American society, where you're the individual, you um, make your own way, and it's fine. So that's kind of generally some general contrasts.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah. That's,
It's there's roughly 25,000, so the population is very small.
mhm.
Um, uh, Everyone's familiar with everyone's family name at the very least. So if you just say your family name, then they'll orient to where you're from within the archipelago and that sort of thing.
Yeah. What are some challenges that you faced, stepping into this role? Um, transitioning from obviously you have a lot of experience in sport, transitioning to like wrestle like a girl and specifically this role. Are there any big challenges that you faced or any small challenges that you've had to overcome?
So um, the space, it's been it's been a incredible what's the word I'm looking for? Just an incredible to watch the whole space of women's wrestling since the inception of Wrestle Like a Girl. I think the challenges that I could see quite easily that we spend some energy and resources around and would like to in the future again is um, there's a distinct culture to women's wrestling that is different than men's wrestling. I think women's wrestling has this element of sisterhood and camaraderie. Um, and uh, I don't want to say that men's wrestling isn't enthusiastic. There's just a different flavor of enthusiasm that's there in women's wrestling. And it hasn't. Not every wrestling room has been initially friendly to having welcoming women in the mat. So I think we've kind of worked through that element over the last 8, 9 years. And I think the culture of having women in the wrestling room is much more acceptable and normalized now than it was a decade ago. Um, I think women's wrestling faces similar challenges to other women's sports, having more female coaches in the room, having just more coaches that fully understand how coaching female wrestlers can be a little bit different than coaching male wrestlers. And I think that's a little bit smaller of a challenge compared to just being fully welcome in the room and having full access to the same resources and level of resources that are available on the men's side.
What are some of the, well, let's step back and talk about your connection to the Jordanian Wrestling Foundation. Kind of where did that start? How did that develop? What's the work that's kind of going into that? Because that's a really interesting, piece that you're working on.
Yeah. So we first were introduced to some individuals in Jordan through I think at the time it was called the Mega Sports Conference, and I could be getting the name of that conference wrong. We were invited by the State Department to attend this conference that was essentially addressing some of the issues at huge sporting events like the Olympics, the Paralympics, the World Soccer World Cup, huge, mega sporting events. And so we were introduced to some members of the royal family who were representing the soccer side within that conference. And the individual was Prince Ali, and he was did his education, primary school education here in the States. He did his university education here, and then has gone back to Jordan to help govern Jordan there. But he wrestled while he was here, and we established a conversation and came back from that conference, and we were looking to add more board members to Wrestle Like a Girl. So we thought this could be a good good addition if he would say yes, and he did. So he was a member of our board for a number of years, and now is a director emeritus of our board. Stands as a resource if we still need it. And as a small organization who's trying to make mighty mighty advances in the space of wrestling, having that affiliation was really helpful for us. So fast forward 4 or 5 years, the Jordanian Olympic Committee and the Jordanian Wrestling Federation have an interest to grow women's wrestling. So they learned about the Prince Ali's experience with Wrestle Like a Girl and asked if we would be interested to help. And of course we said yes.
Yeah. And then you talked a little bit about, your connection with, or your experience in learning how to communicate and having to communicate with different cultures. Was that like the pretty impactful, your experience, working in diplomacy and then coming into working with the Jordanian, partnering with the Jordanian Wrestling Foundation? Was it kind of your experience helped you with that communication
It
and then
does.
different
It
styles of
does.
culture?
So it really does, because I think what international diplomacy has taught me is that when other cultures that are quite different from the one that you're operating and existing in, you really need to take the time to understand what their need is, and how best you can support them versus uh, having perhaps a great idea that you have, um, and not pushing your idea in there. It's really taking that time to understand um, what are the challenges that they have, and what have they tried, What do they think can work? And then looking at your own organization or your own personal skill set, and saying, okay, this is how we think we can be of a support for you. And um, that I think ends up with a better flow of a relationship. And you tend to get better outcomes when you take that approach across cultures.
What are some goals that you have moving forward with Wrestle Like a Girl? Yeah, kind of domestically, internationally, where do you guys see yourself? Where do you see the organization moving?
Um, it's a great question because we've spent the better part of our time supporting high school state sanctioning, having a heavy hand in the NCAA emerging sport status and now championship status. Um, I think the infrastructure of the sport is um, developed to a point. So you have your girl state championships, you've got collegiate programs that the girls can now participate in. It's rolling into the NCAA umbrella, so there's going to be scholarship opportunities available. And when you just kind of think about that kind of construction of, or a phase of construction of a sport, personally, I think, okay, we're in a much better spot than we were a decade ago in terms of having these opportunities and access for girls. I think the area that I'd like to I'd like to further develop um, is kind of two areas, but they're connected. So, coaches education, um, well, also recruiting new coaches into the sport and new female coaches into the sport, um, giving them the resources and the education so they can be successful, and then kind of further amplifying that distinct culture that women's wrestling has, um, and giving that its own space and amplification. So I think in the next 3 years, that would be the two areas that I personally would like to put energy and resource into.
Yeah. And what's been your favorite part? Just a general favorite of your experience, with Wrestle Like a Girl or and any of your careers and any of your journey and
Um,
your favorite part.
oh my gosh. I think one one thing that really maybe goes on under recognized is the dads, the moms, the brothers, the coaches who took the desire of a girl who just wanted to wrestle and created that space and that opportunity for them at a time, maybe I'm speaking 10 or 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And at that point in time where it wasn't necessarily accepted, there weren't a lot of females on the mat. Um, but gosh, it was those dads and moms and coaches and brothers who said, yeah, let's make it happen. Because it takes money, it takes time, it takes uh, uh, challenging the cultural norms of that period of time, um, and to kind of step back and see it blossom over the last couple decades, and how girls, for the most part today, can just go to a wrestling practice if they want to, is probably one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add about just the entire journey, your culture, your history with the sport, your history, your goals moving forward? Anything else you'd like to add?
Um, I think I would like to give my gratitude to the wrestling community. Um, the growth of women's wrestling and the breadth and the depth um, from at all levels, from the Olympic level to the grassroots level. It takes it takes a lot of persistence and determination and belief. And so I just want to say that I personally have a lot of gratitude to the community to continue to that's helped grow it and that continues to believe that um, women's wrestling is fantastic and great and should be available and uh, to all girls. So I think I would like to end on that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was really great being able to speak to you and being able to hear your message and your what you bring to the sport and provide for so many people on so many levels. So I really appreciate you taking the time and talking with us today. Thank you.
Thank you too, Savannah. I appreciate it very much.